Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas.
Welcome back to the Online Great Books podcast. This is your producer, Trent, welcoming you back for part 2 of our interview with Brett from the School Sucks podcast and the School Sucks project. We're going to get right into it, but first, a quick reminder, enrollment is now open for Online Great Books. So if you want to join the great conversation, you want to read the great books of the Western world, and get the education you should have gotten when you were in school, then head on over to onlinegreatbooks.com and sign up now. Enrollment will be open until April 1st, so you got a few days to do it. We hope to see you there. Otherwise, hope you enjoy part 2 of the interview. Thanks.
But somebody posted the Reason article. Reason wrote an article like, we need to shoot the college admissions process into the sun.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So I just pulled this little excerpt from it. Bribing athletic officials to falsely claim the client was a high-value recruit for a certain sport. This often involved sending fake photos of the kids engaged in athletic activities, pole vaulting, swimming, that's ambitious, right? That's just brazen. Like, yeah, it was a pole vaulter, and your face is photoshopped on a pole vaulting person. For sports, they don't actually play. So it was either Laughlin's daughter or Huffman's daughter that was presented as somebody who was like a high up member of this crew association, I think in Los Angeles, and they get into USC as a result of this. So
all you people listening, if you got somebody that's good at Photoshop, I want you to Photoshop Brett's head on Allison Stoke pole vaulting, and then we're going to submit that to like every state university in the country and see if we can get Brett a scholarship.
I love that. I could at least use it as cover art for this episode. Allison Stoke.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, the whole thing. And so the FBI is involved, by the way.
Yeah, Operation Varsity Blues, this is called. And I guess it's been going on for a decade, which is how they managed to ensnare so many people, or have so many people ensnared right when they announced it.
It's so... I'm pretty sure there's other crime, right? I mean, is this the best? Is this the crime that we need to be pursuing? Maybe.
Well, it covers. I mean, it definitely covers a lot of. I think it's a RICO case, right? What they usually use against organized crime. Because you have an enterprise, there's various people involved up and down, like various people at various levels of this enterprise involved in this. So it is conspiracy, it is what's the one they always say, interstate.
Yeah, it's interstate. It's misuse of the U.S. mail service. There's a lot.
So there's lots of federal crimes involved in this, and. I mean, I just wasn't that surprised by it. I mean, I think it's interesting, and I think it is a landmark because lots of people are now, maybe, as the Reason article suggests, going to question how much public funding should be going to higher education, and what does public funding mean for higher education, and how does it change the culture of higher education? So, I think it's probably going to affect it in very similar ways to how it affected the lower levels of schools. If it is a publicly funded thing, it means it has to be all things to all people. We certainly see many, many cries over the last 5 or 6 years coming from these campuses for more safety, more safe spaces, more inclusion, less mean guys, those kinds of things. And that is very much like, to go back to the earlier conversation we were having about what's obscured from history, because there's no place for controversy. There's no place for discomfort. So when you're trying to nerf this whole institution, so many things are going to have to go, right? So many things can't be a part of it, and it has to cater to the weakest and the whiniest in the entire population to survive.
Nerf college.
Yeah.
This whole scandal isn't going to serve to bolster admission standards. It's not going to buff college, right? It's not going to, college isn't going to get harder to get into because of this. It's probably going to make it actually easier. And so if you've got, like, let's say that you are a USC pole vaulter,
right,
legit, and you graduated in May.
The non-photoshopped variety. Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
I think your diploma is worth less today than it was Monday before this news broke.
It's certainly more in question, I would say.
Right. They're like, oh, yeah, sure.
I mean, look at the
Brett,
effect of the Penn State.
Yeah, you were a curler at the University of Wisconsin, right?
Well, even like if you look at the way everybody got the mark of, the Penn State football program, like everybody who was involved in that wound up being, well, it certainly spread beyond Paterno and whoever the really bad guy was. Right. But Paterno's involvement, for those who don't know, this was a scandal a couple of years ago where the Penn State football program, which is a couple hours away from where I am, there were these allegations and I think basically proof of sexual abuse happening inside that program that lots of people knew about it. Lots of people were covering up. It ended Joe Paterno's career. He was one of the most celebrated coaches in the history of college football. I do not know, so I will not comment on how much Joe Paterno actually knew about what was going on and whether or not he participated in the cover-up. But it was definitely a dark mark on so many people who participated in athletics in Penn State, and it even expanded beyond Penn State, right, to college athletic culture. So this is certainly going to have the same effect where you're right. If somebody graduated from USC and they were a pole vaulter or whatever, and you can tie it back to like, oh, were you coached by so-and-so who took all these bribes from, Rick Singer? Yeah, that is definitely a blemish on your athletic / college career for sure.
Yeah. So I've got two daughters here, and I don't know what to do. College is a weird game. You get out of a college perhaps, and you don't know the difference between an invoice and a statement and a finance charge. With your accounting degree. Maybe. Some people certainly do a lot of people get out of college with a real live education and do know things and have some skills. But the inflation in diplomas and these sorts of scandals. And then also just like, do you really want to I wouldn't want to subject myself to that whole thing, just the thing. Can you imagine being at USC in the sports program right now?
No, it's definitely, I mean, but that goes so far and wide across the country in so many academic and athletic programs at a variety of different schools at, levels below college, like a lot of people proctoring these tests who are paid off, they might be high school teachers. They might be guidance counselors. Those are usually the types of people who are taking those jobs. Now, obviously, this guy Singer had quite a network, so it's possible. Like I don't think the barrier to entry to proctoring SAT or ACT tests is super high. But now that whole institution is going to be questioned. I think that's going to actually be one of the predictable, but I would say negative outcomes of this whole thing. I think there's going to be lots of effort to steer attention away from questioning the school religion, from questioning this religious idea of higher education and finding other things to blame or issues, and we can talk about a few of them, things that are going to be more divisive, where now there's an opportunity for mainstream America to say, yeah, maybe we really should look at how much federal money or how much of our money, if we dare, is being funneled into higher education. What I'm worried will happen is that the very partisan media on both sides will convert that revelation into a series of hot button issues that will just turn those people, given the opportunity to have said revelation, into just fighting with each other about, the predictable, comfortable to fight about type issues.
Right.
And
of course, that's what's going to happen.
Sure.
Of course.
And I can name a few of them if you want. I mean,
The issues you mean?
yeah. I mean, one that I've already heard is for-profit education. See what happens when we allow for-profit education. He had this. So Singer had these two enterprises. One was this Edge. It was called. It was a. I have it right here. Edge College and Career Network, which was basically a fake charity. But then he actually, from what I read about him, had a legitimate start in educational services like test prep and college consulting. So it sounds like he was doing work that hey, this affects me negatively, Scott, because this is the work that I used to do.
Right.
I have a blemish too, I guess. But so he started maybe in the 90s doing this. He had a questionable professional background before that. And the other one was called Key, or his test prep and college consulting company was called Key. And, that is for-profit education. Like I said, that is what I used to do. We charged, really substantial hourly rates, and we got results. And that was how we got more business. We got, and the company that I ran in New Hampshire was actually geared primarily towards getting kids into these top tier schools, getting kids what are the scores you need in addition with, the rest of your admissions package to get into these top tier schools. I don't think when I started doing that in 2009 that I was aware of how severe this problem was, of the faith that people were putting, the misguided faith, the incredibly misguided faith that people were putting in higher education and the supposed opportunities it would create. I mean, I should have known, like it didn't create many for me practically. Like I said, I'm grateful for the experience, for the learning experience of going. But that time, if I was more self-directed, could have been better spent. So I think there'll be an outcry on CNN and MSNBC and a variety of lesser blogs and YouTube personalities condemning for-profit education as the gateway to this scandal. I've already heard talk about affirmative action, talk of privilege, right? This is just privileged elites who, if you're already in a system that is so set up to favor you, why are you so incompetent that you would need these extra advantages? But I guess that's the consequence of being privileged. That's an argument that people are making as well. One that I think is really unfortunate, as somebody who used to be a for-profit education service provider, is there'll probably be additional scrutiny towards the SAT and the ACT, right? Like I bet you will start to hear calls, let's do away with these tests.
Yeah.
I was listening to, I just got a whole bunch of articles, like when you said you wanted to talk about this, just grabbed a whole bunch of articles and YouTube clips and started going through them. And one of the ones I found interesting was Alan Dershowitz, and I think he was being interviewed on Fox News. And, he has taught at Harvard for decades, and he's still there. And he acknowledged, he said, look, the culture of academia has basically become a non-meritocracy. Lots of schools have done away with even having grades. Now, my attitude about grades at the lower levels of school certainly probably aligns with higher education institutions doing away with grades, especially with giving elementary school students report cards. Like, yeah, that's not something that I'm for. But what kind of feedback mechanisms are students who are purportedly being trained for careers, being trained in skills, being trained to enter the workforce? What kind of feedback mechanisms are they getting in higher education without grades? Especially if they're at some super large school where they're in classes of 200 or 300 people and you don't get a lot of one-on-one time with professors or assistant professors or assistants to the assistant professors. So people who've gone to very good schools have said that, yes, the admissions is extremely difficult, but once you're in, it's much easier to stay in. First of all, you could pick a nonsense major Like you could pick gender studies or something where professors are predictably more concerned with producing disciples than producing academic rigor. Obviously, it's in the school's interest to keep students there because those students are, I mean, there's all sorts of formula funding for college as well. Like if the student population is filled, if you have struggling students, like students who aren't doing well, students who are on academic probation, there might even be like, formula funding mechanisms that get the schools more money for that. So just because like a student is struggling doesn't mean they're automatically going to get kicked out of the school. The school has lots of incentives to keep those students there. I think, I was talking a couple months ago about this T.M. Landry scandal that happened in Louisiana, right? 49th in the state in education, and people had formed a pretty religious idea about this as a kind of exit from the lack of opportunity, these inner city schools, these underperforming schools.
Yeah, so T.M. Landry, was it in Baton Rouge?
I believe so. It was definitely in Louisiana. I know that, and I remember Louisiana was at like the very bottom of the state list as far as the educational quality metrics were concerned.
I think it was like a predominantly black. I think it was a charter school, right?
Right.
And they had enormous percentages of the kids there going to, top tier schools. They had the fantastic acceptance rates there.
And I bring that up because I want to back away from something that I said, that these kids will go and fail out in the first semester. I think I kind of made that as a rule of the consequence of a fraud like that, or schools themselves in their efforts to make their brochures look more multicultural and diverse are setting kids up for failure. I think that even if kids of any population, any ethnic background, any race, they could all struggle and they could all be pulled along by the school and kept in the school. But there are still consequences of that, right? That is a very, as somebody who struggled in college, even somebody who didn't care about academics at all when I first got there, it was still a very stressful thing. And it still took an emotional toll on me, and it kind of was reinforcing. I remember being like, I wasn't doing well in college until my junior year. And I remember the discouragement and the hopelessness at one point of like, this is just reinforcing everything that I already knew about myself based on high school, right? Based on what I learned in high school, that I'm kind of dumb and I can be a C student. Like this is just a costly way of reinforcing that. And I don't know, I know I have to make it through this, but if I make it through this with a 2.0 GPA and get my BA in communications, what is that even going to mean? In the professional world? I mean, there were moments like that where I was thoughtful enough to ask those questions. And then it was like the discovery of history that, like I said, I was able to prove myself to myself and turn my whole, I was like on the national dean's list a year later. It was, I'm very thankful to that professor for that turnaround, but a lot of kids won't have that experience, right? They get in for one reason or another and they struggle and then they just kind of languish there. But the larger point that I was trying to make is that Dershowitz points out, and a lot of people who've gone to these elite schools point out, Dershowitz included, I think he went to Yale before he taught at Harvard, is that they're turning away from merit, right? They're turning away from those kinds of harsh judgments from reality, cause and effect, honest feedback. Because, again, that's not nerf, right? Getting a D is not nerfy. It just isn't.
Not nerfy, no.
Right? It doesn't feel good. It's triggering, whatever, it's upsetting. So I think that the egalitarian idea that everybody needs to go to college, the outcome that's had in college is like, well, geez, if everyone's going to be here, our standards need to go down. So there's less academic rigor across the board. John Taylor Gatto was pointing that out 20 years ago in the Underground History of American Education, talking about these elite schools, right? Still super hard to get in because they can be exclusive. But once you're there, most people can usually find a way to stay.
Yeah. So what are you getting when you get the diploma?
A signal.
Some of these reports show up to like $6 million were spent in trying to get these kids into whatever school, whatever select school it was. And you think about that, like what could the parent have done with that $6 million? If they said, I've got 6 with a bunch of zeros behind it that I'm willing to toss at this kid, of all the things that they could have done with that, that's what they did. They could have bought them several small businesses,
right,
and have them learn in the School of Hard Knocks, and maybe get one of them to take on. Right? They could have done. You could have hired Alan Dershowitz,
yeah,
to teach your kid law. I mean, they could have, with $6 million, you can do a lot of stuff, and that's what they chose to do with it. So very, very interesting. There's not necessarily like efficient market theory going on here. It's not like, somebody did all the math on like, this is the best use of the $6 million for the benefit of my kid. But that is clearly a parent who's willing to go to great lengths to put their kid in some sort of an advantage. And that's what they chose to do. And that is fascinating to me.
To me, it is at the same level of fascination with like learning that there was a piece of toast that had an image of the Virgin Mary on it when it came out of the toaster, and somebody bought it on eBay for $25,000, right? Like,
right.
I think those two things to me are at the same levels of absurd. And how could somebody so successful... I'm stopping myself mid-sentence after just watching the Academy Awards like 2 weeks ago. I was about to say, how could somebody so successful be so disconnected from reality? But it's actually a pretty common problem based on my experience watching that show and observing Hollywood and the media generally. Successful, like people who have a lot of money, so disconnected from reality and so disconnected from the needs of their own child, right? Like this girl, Lori Loughlin's daughter, is a YouTube star and a famous Instagram person. Like college, how is college anything other than a setback? But she admitted as much in her video when she said, I'm going there for the college experience, to party. So when you talked about like, if you had the option to go to college in 1953, go. Because there was a college experience that was a signal, a credential, I would say more appropriately, and a network. Because there was no other ways to get those things. Forget 1953. There was no other ways to get those things when I started looking at colleges in 1993, right? There was no other way to build a nationwide or a nation-spanning or even globe-spanning network. And there was no substitute credential. I couldn't have a digital paper trail like I could today, right? I couldn't set up a website. I couldn't have a blog. I couldn't have just an easily accessible online portfolio. I was mailing people videotapes in the 90s, in big, bulky envelopes. So there were things that until really recently, like the last 10, 15 years, were just not options, and college was the best bet for lots of people in lots of situations. And there still are plenty of people in numerous situations where college is the best bet, but it is decreasing all of the time. And I think the mainstream America is just not catching up with that reality. It shouldn't surprise us that disconnected Hollywood people are paying millions of dollars to get their child into like a medium to maybe slightly upper tier school.
So let's bring this back to something concrete.
Sure.
Or actionable or unactionable for regular people. So if you've got a kid, and I've got a couple here that are looking at this, do you maybe I don't hire Mr. Singer to get him into State U, but do you go spend the money for the SAT, ACT prep course? I mean, you're still trying to get them into this game where the rules and the rewards aren't clear. And like you said, the value of the diploma is declining. And not only is it declining, it's declining at an increasingly fast rate. So if you have a kid that starts college in the fall here, and let's say it's a great decision today, it's not clear to me that by the time that kid graduates in 4.5 years, that it will have been a good idea. Right.
Right.
Like it's changing fast.
It changed for me between 1995 and 1999. Right.
When you were in school, was that where you were in school?
Right. Like in September 1995, college was, in the program that I was in, is based on everything that I knew, the best path to getting the career that I kind of vaguely wanted. Right. Something in like, journalism, mass media, communications, broadcast, radio. I had some kind of vague need that one of those things was going to satisfy, right? Somewhere there'd be a camera or a microphone that I could sit behind and talk. So
you did.
Yeah. But by 1998, 1999, it was basically the stupidest thing that I could have been doing. And and the problem was I shouldn't call it stupid because I didn't even know.
Right.
But
that's the problem. You probably made the best decision that you could with the information you had,
which was basically none.
Yeah. Right. And you had more information as somebody that was looking at going into college in the fall than somebody who's looking into going into college in the fall of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
You were shooting at a moving target. They are shooting at a much more quickly and smaller moving target that's even smaller. I don't know what the game is, and I don't know what we're getting. I really don't. It's fascinating.
So you have two girls who are close.
They got 14 and 16.
Okay, so they're close.
They're close.
Yeah. I mean, close to the going age, right? It's at least like definitely something that's on the table now.
Yeah, and the older one, she doesn't really have any interest in going to college. Because she's heard me with my tinfoil hat for all these years. But even setting that aside, what does work look like? What do you do to make some path towards being self-sustaining? I don't think it's ever been harder.
Right. It's interesting that you say that because there's never been more opportunity, and I think as a result of that, it's never been a more difficult decision. It's very easy to wind up with decision paralysis because
and then you join the Yang Gang. Get in my bag.
Like, I mean, I feel like when I was a junior or senior in high school, I could have listed all of the options for me on my fingers. Mm-hmm. Like I think I could have listed every major at the college I went to on my fingers of my two hands. And today, just the number of skills that you could insert into the number of industries, it's just multiplied so much that, I want to do this, and you think about how everything is niche down. Like none of that, I mean, niches always existed, but nothing like what we have today, right? Like I want to do digital photography in wedding cakes, like that's the two things you can put together and make a career.
Going to have the number one homeschooling and anti-public education podcast in the world.
Sure.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting,
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, just back to like, I saw maybe like 6 or 7 roads that I could have taken this bachelor's degree in communication down to some kind of career. Like the other thing too is the degree had no specialization. So when I showed it to people, even in the year 2000, they were like, yeah, whatever. What do you know how to do? I was like, nothing good. I mean, I know a little bit about several things, and also, I mean, that's compounded by the fact that I wasn't a good student through most of that program.
But here's the dirty secret that nobody talks about.
Yeah.
Most people aren't good students.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was just a particularly bad intersection of not treating myself well physically, mentally, not having any foresight, not having good study habits, being in a bad school, in a bad program at the wrong time, in a changing industry. Like it was kind of a perfect storm. But there were lots of I could have been a better defender of myself and my needs and my future. So I don't ever want to talk about college in a way that makes people feel like college is an antagonist and they are a victim. So when I catch myself doing that, I want to back away from that and say, here are the responsibilities that I didn't fulfill, and this is where I dropped the ball in this situation. I think that's very important to do.
But I want to talk about the bad grade thing, though.
Sure.
And like everybody thinks that their kid is going to go, and if they can knuckle down, buckle down, they're going to excel, and that it's a great opportunity and all that. And
right.
And they think about that in terms of everything. But the truth is, the average person is average, right? And most people aren't going to be very good students,
right? And
maybe they're very, very bright. I mean, you are, but the circumstances, whatever they may be, means that most people aren't terribly good students. And so what happens? That system isn't built for the average person, and that's the thing that I was keenly aware of when I went in the early 90s, was that it really wasn't. It was built for the ones that were going to excel. But if you weren't one of those, you were there covering the overheads and keeping the lights on for the people that were going to. There was a chick in the School of Microbiology that I was in. Her name was Kim, and Kim's parents both were physicians, and we were both in the pre-med program. And I think our grades were the same, pretty darn close. She was bright. Not any brighter than me, I don't think. But our grades were very, very similar. But it was all I could do to afford to go there and do what I was doing. And then the summer before her junior year, she started taking the MCAT prep courses, medical candidacy aptitude test stuff. I couldn't do that. What do you do? If you don't make the best grade and you aren't in the best degree program, what happens? I don't know. There's just so many questions, and it's just not the automatic that it was, pre 1990 or in 1958. It's just a mess.
Well, and as we see with Operation Varsity Blues here too, what if you're not in a top tier school? Or I'm sure those schools that wouldn't typically be considered top tier schools, that were on the list of the schools that were involved in or victims of this scandal or this scheme, because I'm guessing it doesn't go all the way to the top in most of these schools. I'm guessing most people in the schools had no idea this was going on, and it's just like the holes in the system that other people exploited. But there must have been a reason why parents or Rick Singer had selected these schools, even if they were not Ivy League schools. But that's also another really important question in addition to grades is where are you? My advice at the end is you want to go to college? All right, well, it better be a top tier school with a great endowment where things can change really quickly and resources can be added or subtracted as necessary, well ahead of the trends in that industry that you're trying to go into. Or even if it's not a top tier school, if it's a medium tier school, they better be known for the program that you are going into at that school. And if you can't satisfy those requirements and be, in the top of your class grades-wise while you're there, and be building, related professional experience and building a helpful professional network lateral to the pursuit of that degree, do something else, right? Do not go to the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts and get a degree in criminal justice.
Right. A B student at a B tier school is oblivion.
Absolutely. And that is the new high school diploma, right? So that kind of takes us back to one of the things that I think is at the root of this problem, that people are getting those crappy criminal justice degrees from crap college because the value of the degree is so thoughtlessly inflated. But now those degrees that were probably just always hovering right above worthless are now worthless, are unquestionably worthless to employers. They have no practical value. But the thing that we're trying to sound the alarm on this show and various other places, there's people with bigger platforms than me saying the exact same thing, is that the religion about this needs to change, right? And that's just one of the unfortunate things that I think the utility of this show for the people in your audience and the people in my audience can be. If you converse with people about this while it is a scandal, and I think this might just be the beginning. I think this might expand. I think if more famous people are named, this could be in the news for a while. Do not let it be shifted. If you see this on Facebook, if you see this on Twitter, if you're having these conversations in real life, focus on the root problems in higher education and the public attitudes about this issue. The media is going to take it to identity politics. It's going to be privilege, affirmative action. That is just an endless fight for you to sink into, right? For-profit education, down with capitalism. Don't take that bait. And I would even say if people, and this is like probably a less of an incendiary one, but if people talk about doing away with standardized tests, I don't know. I have a soft spot for maybe I certainly didn't do well on them the first time I took them, but I did tutor the SAT, and I ran a company, and the idea that I was presenting, doing SAT tutoring, and the idea that I was presenting to people is like, there are critical thinking skills that school left underdeveloped, and I think that a short-term rigorous preparation for this test can help a young person be more college ready. If they take that opportunity, they can expand their vocabulary by thousands of words in ways that make sense. They can become more persuasive writers, more efficient persuasive writers. They can expand their critical thinking skills through the treadmill of like higher level multi-step math problems. Those are all good things.
Yeah.
And I watched a lot of students who were, by the public schools metrics, performing very well in AP classes, terribly frustrated to the point of yelling at me in a couple of cases, in a couple of these classes, when presented with real critical thinking challenges. And that was that was 2008, 2009, 2010. I was having those experiences, and that just further alerted me to the failure of public school. Now, public school is very successful at a lot of things, indoctrination, obedience, conformity, does all that well, producing an apathetic public that's easy to write new things on, very accomplished. But getting people excited about education and making people rigorous thinkers, it fails. And I saw that firsthand, with AP, top-tier school-bound kids. So I think that the SAT is valuable, but because when the SAT is mentioned, the sort of widespread perception is, oh, SAT, terrible, 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 right? There's like a negative association with it. It can become a lightning rod for the whole meritocracy discussion. As meritocracy moves away, or realistic feedback mechanisms in higher education, the SAT could go on the chopping block and could open the door to, the removal of a lot more meritocracy from higher education. A lot more realistic feedback done away with for the sake of not hurting people's feelings. And I think when you're training people to survive and thrive in the real world, honest feedback, even if it's, cold and prickly, is a good thing to have.
So, I always wanted, when I was in high school, I always wanted to be able to just take the ACT or the SAT and just move on. If you could take those tests and you're 12 and a college would take you, I just like, that should be good enough, but at the time in Oklahoma, you couldn't do that. So I'm all for the meritocracy and actually that kind of standardized test. Seems to be the market has spoken and seems to agree that the SAT is a valid ruler to use to evaluate people's readiness for school or for college.
So there's that, and there's the opportunity.
I think that the post 2008 economic realities have disabused people of their high school or their college diploma worship. I think that's done a lot to get rid of that, and then like you said, the social justice stuff and all that. College is on the decline in terms of the steam it's held in. But to go back to the history of American education from an hour ago, something that I've seen since since I've noticed this since I had kids. It was probably going on before then, but there is sort of a private education, public education hybrid that goes on that people never want to talk about. So it's very, very common for people to send their kid to the local public school, and then they ring the bell, and then school's over, and they take them straight to Kumon or Sylvan or the tutor, and then they get more.
Yeah.
And then they take them to the prep. Then they take them to the prep guy, the Princeton Review or Kaplan or Venoitte or whatever. And I think that's new. I think that's new-ish. I think that's a newer thing that has occurred. I think probably since the 70s, where there's a blurring there, and people aren't part of just one or the other. The private or the public in education. So the market seems to recognize that the kids aren't getting what they need there in K through 12, for example, and taking them to Sylvan or Kumon or whatever to get more and to get more accountability and hopefully better results.
Yeah, and it's a shame because I think there's a lot of people who work on that private service provider and who, sure, there's plenty of people who just do it as a job to make extra money. A lot of those people are teachers, but in my experience, I met a lot of really competent people, a lot of young people, like a lot of college students do that kind of work. Young people are energetic, they're enthusiastic, they're often passionate about the subjects they're tutoring in, and it's kind of like, well, did you really need that 7 hours of what you did before you went to the private tutoring service? Like, I remember. I worked with high schoolers, middle schoolers when I still did academic tutoring. Kids would have problems with teachers. They'd have some kind of arrangement with the school where they'd be privately tutored in a subject. We could do a year. When you subtract those other 25 kids and the school schedule, you can do a year of instruction in 8 weeks, less even. Depending on the subject, depending on the kid's interest, but depending on the kid's aptitude. Maybe a month, you pre-algebra, algebra, something like that. You get through all the key concepts in a month.
Yeah. For a very, very long time, we took our oldest daughter to a college student who was a tutor, who was her tutor, and they did that on Wednesdays for about an hour and a half. And in that hour and a half, they could do what a normal kid would be doing in maybe a week or more in their regular class. And, pretty low cost and, completely individual and one-on-one help with that, and they got along great and got good results. So what in the hell could they have done with that $6 million instead of trying to get them on the crew team?
Exactly. If I were to add, I always talked about these 3 hidden lessons of school. If I were to add a fourth that is implicit and constant through the entire experience, and I would say this even extends into higher education, is that young people learn their time is not valuable. Right, because nobody ever values it. Nobody ever encourages them to value it. Nobody ever acts like it's valuable. I mean, so much of school is just waste, right? It is just routine. It is just programming. It is just bloat and fat and unnecessary. And if you endure that for 15,000 hours plus 4 additional years of schooling, where, my goodness, if I went to college to get the information that was in my bachelor's degree, right? Like the hard skills that were in my bachelor's degree, I could have done 1995 to the year 2000 when I graduated. I could have done that in a summer.
Right.
I could have done it in a summer. And so it was just an extension of a lesson that I was happy to accept based on my previous training. That this time, when I am most energetic, when I am, just in this prime of emerging into adulthood, it's perfectly fine to spend, a Friday night throwing beer bottles at a payphone or whatever. It's just like so many wasted nights, so many days sleeping till noon, watching TV, playing PlayStation, just wasted it because, trying to find downtime activities, and there was just so much downtime that when you're surrounded by a bunch of dudes, you're not going to fill that time constructively, most of it. And I could have been in and out of there, June to August if the program had been structured more efficiently.
All that beer bottle throwing at payphones, that's what people normally call the college experience.
The college experience, right?
That's
a lot of what you're paying for.
Well, gosh, we've been doing it for 2 hours. I think that be critical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be critical about about what you are buying with your time and your money when you go to university, and see if you can't find some other ways of getting what you believe are the good things that you would get from university. I told the story of my friend Aaron, and you have many, many different people on your show there at School Sucks Podcast that have gone their own way and found a way to a livelihood and a fulfilling existence without subjecting themselves to all of that. And I hope people. What did you call it? The religion?
Yeah.
I hope that they throw off that religion and of higher education and find their own way, because whether they do or not, it's going to come to a halt soon.
Right.
When the music stops, you want to make sure you've got a chair, because it's not good. It worries me a lot.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
When I was going to the OU in the 90s, there were still all of these just wood frame buildings there, and a lot of them were empty, and they were these temporary structures built after World War II. When the GI Bill fired up, and so they had the enrollment there just swelled when all those GIs came home, and they put them in these, essentially temporary buildings, and they're all gone now. But since then, that school has grown and grown and grown, and there are going to be tumbleweeds there soon, I hope.
Right.
Because people need to stop throwing their money and their years and their youth and their enthusiasm at that place, and spend that money and time and enthusiasm on their own lives and building their own unique skills.
I totally agree. And so many people that I've had on the show that I really admire had very little college or none, or they tried it and said, no, oh, wait, I found something better. I found something faster. I found something more efficient. And, like what you guys do, obviously, at Online Great Books is a way that allows people, I think, a real college experience. Like when people think about like knowledge acquisition and deliberation, like the kind of things they imagine happening at college that obviously happen almost nowhere today without all kinds of political or social interference.
Right.
The fat is trimmed. And I try to do the best job I can with that at School Sucks. I've really tried to do a better job with it in the last couple of years to really do the opposite of that lesson of school, which is respect people's time and say, if you're listening to this, I know your time is precious. I know how many people are competing for your time and attention right now. And I think that is a really valuable thing to pass on to children too, right? Like helping children value their time by modeling value for your own time as a parent or a mentor, but also, respecting their time and space and freedom. I think that's really important. And of course, all of those practices are entirely antithetical to what is happening in school and most of college.
Well, Brett Venoitte, you're doing the Lord's work, man. Thanks for doing this with me.
Thank you so much for having me. Anytime, I'm always happy to talk to you, Scott. It's great.
We can just talk and talk and talk. What do you want people to do? Do they need to go follow you somewhere? What do they need to do?
If people are just dipping their toes into the whole history of school, problem with school conversation, and I think it's one of the most important conversations to start having if you're interested in, forwarding critical thinking, self-directed education. I have a YouTube channel. And there's a video series there called The Underground History of American Education. It is like a documentary series of vignettes from John Taylor Gatto's book of the same title. And it's consumable in parts, and it kind of lays out some important highlights of the history. But on School Sucks Podcast, which people can access at schoolsucksproject.com or through any podcatcher, just School Sucks Podcast, you'll find us. We try to focus on solutions, and I put those solutions into 3 categories. The first is real-world education, which includes things like apprenticeship, homeschooling, unschooling. The second is personal development, which deals with things like health and fitness, productivity, time management, psychological wellness, self-esteem through the work of Nathaniel Brandon. And the final major category is critical thinking and learning. And, that's a lot of what you guys do at Online Great Books. And the Great Conversation fits into that. Understanding logic, understanding philosophy. So most of what we do falls into those 3 solutions categories. But as our name suggests, we also do try to alert people to the problems with school and higher education, like we did in our conversation today. So I hope people will, add School Sucks to their list of podcasts and, look at the variety of conversations we've had on the college issue. You can always just go to the website, schoolsucksproject.com, search college problems. You'll find a ton of shareable audio and video.
Well, thanks so much for doing this. Guys, go to onlinegreatbooks.com and you can join our little mailing list there, and we'll send you stuff about how to educate yourself using the great books. Thanks for doing this, Uncle Brett. We will talk to you again very soon, man.
My pleasure. Thank you.